Service and sacrifice take many forms in America, but few demonstrations are as powerful as when they're revealed unexpectedly in an ordinary moment that suddenly becomes extraordinary. During what seemed like a typical episode of Family Feud, the Jackson family, with three active-duty military members, gave an answer to the final question that stopped Steve Harvey in his tracks and brought the entire studio to a standstill. What began as entertainment transformed instantly into a powerful reminder of what truly matters, revealing the unseen sacrifices made by military families that most civilians never fully comprehend. The atmosphere in the Family Feud studio was electric that Wednesday afternoon in March 2024. The Jackson family from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, had advanced to the final round after defeating the Peterson family from Ohio in a closely contested match. The Jacksons weren't your typical Family Feud contestants. Major Robert Jackson, the family patriarch, had served 22 years in the Army with multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. His wife, Captain Sarah Jackson, was an Army nurse with 15 years of service. Their eldest son, Lieutenant Michael Jackson, had followed in his parents' footsteps, recently completing his first tour in the Middle East. The two younger Jackson children, Emma and David, were college students, both enrolled in ROTC programs. They stood together on stage, 3 generations of military service represented in a single family. They wore civilian clothes rather than uniforms, but their posture and composure subtly reflected their military background. The audience had warmed to them immediately, impressed by their quick thinking and the good-natured way they supported each other throughout the game. Steve Harvey had developed a particular rapport with the family, especially with Major Robert Jackson. During breaks in filming, they had discussed their shared experiences growing up in challenging circumstances. Steve's respect for the family was evident in the way he engaged with them, a bit less of his typical teasing banter, replaced with a genuine warmth. "All right, Jacksons," Steve announced as they prepared for fast money. "You've made it to the final round. Who's going to play?" "Sir, Michael and I will take this one," Major Jackson replied with a crisp nod. As Lieutenant Michael Jackson stepped forward to go first, Steve asked the standard question. "So, what will you do with the money if you win today?" Michael smiled. "Well, some of it will go to the Wounded Warrior Project. The rest will help with my sister's college tuition." The audience applauded appreciatively at this answer, and Steve nodded with approval before sending Michael to the isolation booth, while Major Jackson prepared to answer the same questions afterward. The fast money round proceeded smoothly. Lieutenant Michael Jackson performed admirably, scoring 176 points out of the necessary 200 to win the $20,000 prize. As Major Jackson stepped up for his turn, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. They needed just 24 more points to win. "All right, Major Jackson," Steve said. "You need 24 points. If you give me the number 1 answer on any of these questions, I think you've got this in the bag." Major Jackson nodded confidently. The first 4 questions went reasonably well. With 1 question remaining, the Jacksons had accumulated 187 points. They needed just 13 more to win the grand prize. "Final question," Steve announced. "Name something you'd leave behind if you had to evacuate your home quickly." The studio fell silent as Major Jackson considered his answer. For a moment, something shifted in his expression, a subtle change that suggested this question had struck a deeper chord than anyone might have expected. "Photos," he answered quietly. Steve looked down at his card and smiled broadly. "Good answer. Let's see if it's on the board." The board flipped to reveal Photos photo albums as the number 1 answer, worth 42 points. The Jackson family had won the game handily. As the family celebrated their victory, Steve approached Major Jackson for the standard post-game conversation about their win. What happened next would transform a routine game show moment into something profoundly moving. "So, Major Jackson," Steve began, "that final answer, photos, came pretty quickly to you." What Steve didn't know was that he had inadvertently touched on something deeply personal to the Jackson family, something they hadn't planned to discuss on national television. Major Jackson's demeanor shifted subtly. The celebration of their win faded as a more serious expression crossed his face. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to share their story. "Yes, it did come quickly," Major Jackson acknowledged, his voice steady but somehow different from moments before. "Because 3 years ago, our family had 15 minutes to evacuate our home in Colorado Springs during a wildfire, and photos were the only personal items we managed to grab." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey, usually quick with a response, simply stood there, microphone in hand, clearly not having expected this turn in the conversation. Major Jackson continued, "We lost everything else. Our home, furniture, clothing, keepsakes from deployments, everything except our photos and the clothes on our backs." Captain Sarah Jackson stepped closer to her husband, placing her hand on his arm in a gesture of support as he spoke. Lieutenant Michael rejoined his family, standing tall beside his father. "The thing is, Mr. Harvey," Major Jackson continued, "our family has had to evacuate many times before, but in different ways. Sarah and I have deployed multiple times, sometimes with just days' notice. Michael just returned from his first deployment 8 months ago." Steve finally found his voice. "So when I asked that question, it wasn't hypothetical for us," Captain Sarah finished, quietly. "It's a reality military families live with constantly. What do you take? What do you leave behind? Sometimes it's possessions during a natural disaster, but more often it's—" Her voice faltered slightly, and Major Jackson completed her thought. "More often it's leaving each other. Missing birthdays, graduations, anniversaries. When I was deployed during Emma's high school graduation, all I had was a photo of her in her cap and gown that Sarah sent me." The studio remained utterly silent. Even the production crew, normally bustling about during filming, stood motionless, transfixed by the unexpected turn of events. Steve Harvey, visibly moved, took a moment to compose himself. "I've been doing this show for years, and I've heard all kinds of stories. But this hits different." Lieutenant Michael stepped forward. "The hardest part isn't even the deployments themselves. It's that most people don't understand what military families go through. The constant moves, the missed milestones, the worry when a loved one is in a conflict zone, and you don't hear from them for days or weeks." Emma, the Jacksons' 19-year-old daughter, added softly, "I've lived in 7 different homes and attended 5 different schools. Each time we moved, we had to decide what to take and what to leave, including friends." The youngest family member, 18-year-old David, spoke up. "When the wildfire took our home, it was actually not the first time we'd lost everything. Dad's first deployment, our storage unit with family heirlooms was flooded. We've learned that people matter more than things." Steve looked at the family with newfound appreciation. "So when you said those photos were what you'd grab first—" "Those photos are our continuity," Major Jackson explained. "They're proof that despite all the separations, all the moves, all the losses, we're still a family. That we were present for each other, even when we physically couldn't be." Captain Sarah added, "Military families become experts at finding ways to be present even when we're apart." The photos, video calls, care packages, they're lifelines. Steve turned to address the studio audience, many of whom were visibly emotional. Folks, I think we're witnessing something really important here. We talk about sacrifice in abstract terms, but this family is living it every day. He turned back to the Jacksons. You mentioned the prize money would go to Wounded Warrior Project and college tuition. Is there a story there too? Major Jackson nodded, placing his hand on his son's shoulder. Michael was injured during his deployment, not severely enough to make headlines, but enough to need 3 surgeries and months of rehabilitation. The Wounded Warrior Project provided support when we needed it most. As for the college fund, he glanced at his younger children. Military service has been our family's tradition, but we want Emma and David to have options. Their service might take different forms. The studio remained in rapt silence as the full weight of the family's sacrifices became clear. This wasn't just about one evacuation or one deployment. It was about a lifetime of service and sacrifice that most Americans only glimpse from a distance. Steve Harvey, who had interviewed thousands of contestants over the years, appeared genuinely at a loss for words. The usual game show rhythm had given way to something far more meaningful, an unexpected window into the reality of military life. Finally, Steve addressed the cameras directly. We need to take a moment here. What started as a game has become something much more important. The Jackson family has given us a glimpse into a reality that many of us don't fully understand. The executive producer made an unprecedented decision, speaking through Steve's earpiece. Take all the time you need. This matters. After a brief pause to allow everyone to collect themselves, Steve made an impromptu decision that broke from the show's standard format. I know this isn't how we usually do things, he began, but I'd like to invite anyone in our audience who has a connection to military service, whether you've served yourself or have family members who have, to stand up. Nearly half the studio audience rose to their feet. Some wore expressions of pride, others of solemn understanding. A few were visibly emotional. Steve looked around at the standing audience members with appreciation. Thank you all for your service and your sacrifices. He turned back to the Jackson family. You see, you're not alone, even though it might feel that way sometimes. An elderly man in the front row raised his hand. Steve, noticing this, walked over and offered him the microphone. I served in Vietnam, the man said, his voice steady despite his age. What this family said about the photos, that hit home. 50 years later, the photos I carried with me during my tour are still my most precious possessions. A young woman a few rows back spoke next. My husband is currently deployed. Our daughter was born 3 months ago. He's only seen her through video calls. Those screenshots on my phone, they're everything to me right now. One by one, audience members shared brief glimpses into their own experiences with military service and separation. What had begun as a game show was transforming into a powerful moment of community and understanding. Steve returned to the stage, visibly moved by the stories. Major Jackson, your family came here to play a game and maybe win some money, but you've given us something far more valuable, a reminder of what service really means. The executive producer's voice came through Steve's earpiece again. Steve, the network wants to do something special here. Steve nodded slightly, acknowledging the message before addressing the Jacksons. I've just been informed that Family Feud and our network partners would like to do something to recognize your family's service. Instead of the standard $20,000 prize, we're doubling it to $40,000. The audience erupted in applause, but Steve raised his hand. Wait, there's more. Our producers have also arranged for an additional $10,000 donation to the Wounded Warrior Project in the Jackson family's name. Captain Sarah brought her hand to her mouth in surprise, while Major Jackson stood straighter, clearly moved by the gesture. But that's not all, Steve continued. We want to do something about those photos you mentioned, the ones that are so precious to your family. Our team would like to create professional photo books of your family memories, properly preserved for generations to come. Lieutenant Michael stepped forward. Mr. Harvey, we're deeply grateful, but we didn't share our story for rewards. There are thousands of military families making the same sacrifices every day, many with far greater challenges than ours. Steve nodded in understanding. That's exactly why this matters. Your story helps make their stories visible too. Major Jackson looked thoughtful. If I may make a suggestion, Mr. Harvey, perhaps instead of the photo books just for us, your show might consider a program that helps military families preserve their memories during deployments. Steve turned to his producer off stage, who nodded enthusiastically. Consider it done. We'll work with military support organizations to develop something meaningful. The conversation had transcended the game show format entirely, evolving into something far more significant. Rather than the usual celebration focused on the money won, this had become a moment of genuine connection and understanding. Before we wrap up today, Steve said, I want to ask the Jackson family if there's anything you wish civilians better understood about military life, something that might help bridge the gap between those who serve and the broader society they serve. The family exchanged glances, and Captain Sarah stepped forward. I think what most people don't realize is that military service isn't just a job. It's a lifestyle that affects every member of the family. When one person serves, the entire family serves alongside them. The children move schools, spouses interrupt careers, families endure separations. It's a commitment we make together. Lieutenant Michael added, and sometimes the hardest part is coming home and trying to explain experiences that most people can't relate to. That's why military families often become so close. We understand each other's realities. Young Emma spoke up with wisdom beyond her years. I think I'd want people to know that saying thank you for your service is nice, but taking a genuine interest in understanding military life matters even more. Ask questions. Listen to stories. Remember that service comes in many forms. Steve nodded thoughtfully. That's a powerful reminder for all of us. And I think today, your family has done more to help people understand than 100 documentaries could. As the segment prepared to conclude, the studio audience, both military and civilian, gave the Jackson family a standing ovation that continued long after the cameras would normally have cut away. The producers, recognizing the significance of the moment, let it continue. When the applause finally quieted, Steve addressed the cameras for his closing remarks. Folks, we came here today to play a game, to ask trivial questions and laugh at surprising answers. Instead, we received a profound lesson about service, sacrifice, and what really matters when everything else is stripped away. He turned to the Jackson family. Thank you for your service, not just the kind that comes with uniforms and deployments, but the everyday sacrifices that few people see or understand. You've given our audience and our viewers at home a gift today. Major Jackson, ever modest, simply replied, It's been our honor, Mr. Harvey, truly. When the episode aired 3 weeks later, the response was immediate and overwhelming. What had been an unplanned, authentic moment resonated deeply with viewers across America. The hashtag #JockJock_PhotosWorthFighting began trending as military families shared their own stories and precious photographs online. The network, recognizing the impact of the episode, organized a special follow-up show dedicated to military families. The Jacksons were invited back, not as contestants, but as honored guests, alongside representatives from various military support organizations. The studio had been transformed for the occasion. Instead of the standard game show set, the stage featured a gallery of photographs submitted by military families from across the country, images capturing reunions, deployments, graduations attended via video call, and countless other moments that told the story of service and sacrifice. Steve Harvey, dressed more formally than his usual game show attire, welcomed the audience with uncharacteristic solemnity. 3 weeks ago, something unexpected happened on our stage, he began. What started as a simple game show question revealed a depth of sacrifice that left me, someone who talks for a living, completely speechless. Today, we're following up on a promise we made to the Jackson family and to military families everywhere. The cameras panned to the Jackson family, seated in a place of honor in the front row. They appeared somewhat uncomfortable with the attention, but determined to use this platform to highlight an important cause. Steve continued, "The response to the Jackson story has been extraordinary. We've received thousands of messages from military families and civilians alike, all sharing how that moment affected them. But more importantly, it started conversations about the realities of military life that too often go unacknowledged. The special program featured segments highlighting different aspects of military family life, the challenges of frequent relocations, the realities of parenting during deployment, the difficulties of reintegration after service. Throughout, the focus remained on practical ways civilians could better understand and support military families in their communities. Midway through the program, Steve invited Major Jackson to join him on stage. "Robert, when your family appeared on our show, you mentioned photos being the one thing you'd grab in an evacuation because they represent continuity for your family during separations. That insight sparked something important." Steve gestured toward the side of the stage, where representatives from several technology and photography companies stood. These companies have collaborated to create the Continuity Project, which will provide free digital preservation services for military families, ensuring their most precious memories are securely stored and accessible, regardless of where service takes them. Major Jackson appeared genuinely moved. "Mr. Harvey, this is exactly the kind of practical support that makes a difference. When you're deployed in a combat zone, knowing your family memories are safe, that there's a record of life continuing even during separation, that means everything." The program continued with the announcement of several other initiatives inspired by the Jacksons' appearance. Family Feud would integrate questions about military life and service into future episodes, helping educate civilian audiences about military realities. A partnership with several national hotel chains would provide free accommodations for families visiting wounded service members during recovery. A mentorship program connecting military children with others experiencing similar challenges would launch in time for the next major deployment cycle. "These initiatives aren't charity," Steve emphasized. "They're investments in the families who sacrifice so much for all of us. And they all began because one family was willing to share their truth on our stage." Lieutenant Michael Jackson joined his father on stage. "What's been most meaningful about this experience is seeing how many people genuinely want to understand military life better. The gap between military and civilian communities isn't caused by lack of caring. It's caused by lack of exposure and understanding. And that understanding goes both ways," Major Jackson added. "This experience has helped our family appreciate how deeply civilians do care, even when they might not know how to express it or what practical help looks like. Steve nodded. I think that's the most important lesson in all of this. Often the biggest barriers between us aren't indifference. They're simply not knowing each other's realities. As the special program neared its conclusion, Steve invited Emma and David Jackson to join their father and brother on stage. Captain Sarah, who had been deployed 3 days earlier on a medical mission, joined via video call from a military base thousands of miles away. A poignant real-time illustration of the separations military families endure. Sarah, Steve addressed the screen where her face was projected. Your family has started something important here. What do you hope comes from all this attention? From the slightly pixelated screen, Captain Sarah replied, Honestly, I hope this conversation continues long after the cameras stop rolling. Military service creates unique challenges for families, but it also builds extraordinary strength and resilience. I hope civilians gain better understanding, yes, but I also hope military families recognize their own strength through this conversation. Steve turned to address the camera directly for his closing remarks. When Major Jackson answered photos to our final question, he wasn't just giving a game show response. He was sharing a piece of wisdom earned through years of service and sacrifice. The understanding that what truly matters isn't what we own, but the connections we maintain even across time and distance. He continued, In a world where we're often divided by politics and perspectives, the Jackson family reminded us of something essential, that service comes in many forms, that sacrifice is happening in families all around us every day, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply listen and try to understand each other better. Major Jackson offered his own final thoughts. Our family didn't expect any of this attention. We came to play a game show, not to become symbols of military service. But if our experience helps bridge the gap between military and civilian communities even a little bit, then it's been worthwhile. Because ultimately, we're all serving the same country, just in different ways. As the program concluded, Steve Harvey stood with the Jackson family, no longer a game show host, but simply an American citizen grateful for their service. To the Jackson family and to all military families watching, thank you doesn't seem adequate, but it's where we start. Thank you for your service, for your sacrifices, and for helping the rest of us understand what those words truly mean. The cameras captured one final image, the Jackson family standing together, 3 generations of service represented in one frame, their commitment to each other and to their country evident in their bearing and in the bonds between them. Captain Sarah's face on the video screen completed the family portrait, separated by distance but united in purpose and love. The image faded to the gallery of photographs submitted by military families across the country, visual testimony to the countless untold stories of service and sacrifice happening every day throughout America. And as the screen faded to black, a simple message appeared. To those who serve, and to the families who serve alongside them, your sacrifice is seen. Your service matters. If you were moved by this story of a military family's sacrifice and the power of understanding between different parts of our society, please like and subscribe for more content that highlights the extraordinary moments happening in ordinary American lives. Sometimes the most powerful television moments are the ones that remind us of our shared humanity.